Right, so welcome to this lesson where we're going to take a look at providing fallback support for older browsers, but also we're going to take a look at a modern browser that's going to basically make this project not work, which is of course Internet Explorer 10. Internet Explorer 10 does support CSS 3D transformations, but it does not support Preserve 3D. And that's going to cause a major problem. So what I'm going to do is very quickly just open this up in the browser. Now you'll be able to see that yes, this is all working fine. Now, what I can do to emulate what Internet Explorer does is it will still transform in the 3D space. However, with the transform style property, it only supports the value flat and inherent, so it doesn't preserve the 3D of the child element. So in this case we have the cube, and the cube consists of faces. Those faces have their own transformations. Now if we cannot preserve the 3D, we cannot have a cube, we cannot have that object. So what it's doing is it's supporting the value flat or inherent, which basically will turn your cube into a flat plane like this, a piece of paper. So you'll be able to see now when I click on this, when it goes to the side, it basically just goes flat. And that's because what it's done is it's not allowed any of those child elements or all those faces to have their own individual transformations. And so obviously this is going to break our example. Also, it's going to create a problem, especially with Modernizer. So as you know, I loaded in Modernizer, so if I inspect this now, we have Modernizer loaded in right here, and Modernizer checks for features. Now, as it stands on their website, they don't currently have the ability to check to see whether Preserve 3D is supported. But don't fear, we can add a custom script onto Modernizer to actually check to see if Preserve 3D works. And of course, if Preserve 3D works, the browser will also support 3D transformations as well, which is really cool. So even though we've ticked and asked it to check for CSS transform capabilities, what I want to do is add on to Modernizer to check if Preserve 3D works. So how are we going to do that? Well, I'm going to open up Dreamweaver and I'm just going to go ahead and save that. Go into modernizer.js and I'm going to scroll down. So what I need to do is open up my custom little script right here. And I'm just going to copy that and paste this in. So what this is going to do is it's going to check for that feature, and then if Preserve 3D is supported, what you're going to do is get the class CSS transforms preserve 3D. And I know that's a little bit of a long name for a class, but however, that tells me yes, that Preserve 3D is supported, and so I can basically create this cube and so forth. Now, this is the class that I want to target, because in Internet Explorer 10, what happens is you'll get the class no-CSS transforms preserve 3D. So I want to just check for that class right there, and that will solve the problem. Nice and easy. So once I have gone ahead and put in that little custom script right there, the next thing to do is to basically say I don't want to apply any perspective, any 3D transformations, or say preserve 3D and so forth, unless we have that class on the HTML root level element. So the first thing we're going to do is take a look at the viewport, because that's pretty much the root level of our 3D scene effectively. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is add in that class, and then what I'm going to do is say space and then point to the viewport and paste this in. And there are going to be a few other things that I'm going to affect that possibly aren't anything to do with 3D. So for example, overflow, width and height, and so on and so forth. So I'm just going to say viewport, and then I'm going to take all of those CSS properties right there, which is basically the perspective, and cut them out. Everything else is to do with the width, the height, and the positioning, so I'm just going to leave them where they are for now. And then again, I want to do the same thing, so I'll copy that class, and then we do the same thing for the cube. So I'm going to point to the cube, move all of those CSS properties, and put them into that selector right there. And then what I need to do is do the same for the sides, front, back, and so forth. Now, there's something very, very important right here. These classes that basically are referring to the cube, again being rotated, I don't actually need to bother with these, because at the end of the day, these are being applied by JavaScript, and I need to also check in JavaScript whether preserve 3D or that class is on the HTML root level element. If not, then none of these classes will be applied anyway. So it's pointless me making these selectors even more burdensome for the browsers, which is just going to slow things down. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is just focus on the front, back, top, and so forth selectors. This right here, I'm just going to leave it for the time being, but however, I don't really want position absolute, and I'll explain that in just a second. So I'm just going to go ahead and finish off all of these selectors. Alright, so I've gone ahead and completed that now, but however what I've noticed is that we just have these selectors right here, just setting the background color to light or dark. And of course you've got quite a few faces like left, right, and so forth that have, you know, the light background. So you might as well amalgamate them all together into one CSS selector, so you decrease the file size, and also it makes your code easier to maintain. So I'm just going to go ahead and very quickly do that. Alright, so now I've gone ahead and done that, you should be able to go back into the browser, hit refresh, and nothing should have changed. Yeah, you get a little bit of an animation right there, but however, nothing's changed. It's still working exactly as we want it to. So that's perfectly fine. So now what I want to do is emulate a browser that doesn't support CSS 3D transformations. The reason being is because I don't actually want to download an old browser. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is go into my source code, and where I have modernizer, I'm just going to comment that out. So then that class is not going to be added to the HTML root level element, and of course what that means is we are not going to get any CSS 3D transformations. So we're just going to go ahead and do that, and pow, that's basically what we're left with. So what you're seeing right here is the bottom right here, because don't forget, all of these divs that represent faces of our cube have had the positioning set to absolute, and that's very important. You need them stacked over the top of one another, otherwise you won't get that cube effect. But however, in this case we don't want that because we don't have any CSS 3D transformations. So how are we going to tackle this problem? Well, again, go to your main CSS, and inside of there what we'll have is this right here, which is pointing to all of those child divs of the cube, which is the faces. We have the width, the height, and also the position set to absolute. So the easiest way to actually point to all of those divs and make sure that that class is on there is by pasting in the class name. So that is effectively pointing to the root level element. Then we're just going to point to the front just like so, and then what we're going to do is put in the tilde right here. So this basically means if it's on the same level as this element right here, then apply these styles. And of course I'm going to write div there so it's generic. So all you need to know is we're pointing to the HTML root level element, then we're pointing to the front div, and then we're looking for divs on the same level. So they are all childs of the cube element, and then we can start to apply some styles. So I'm just going to copy that because we want those styles if we do have 3D support, but if we don't, we need to change this now. So right here what we have is width 100%. Now this may be okay for you, but just for precautionary reasons I'm going to change this to 380 pixels, and also this one to 380 pixels. Then also what we're going to do is get rid of that position absolute, so then it defaults to relative positioning. The next thing I want to do is say float left, so I'm just going to go ahead and save that now. Let's go back out into the browser and hit refresh, and let's see what we get. So I can see all of my faces right now, but you'll notice we have gaps in here and stuff is appearing right at the top of that div element right there, and that's a problem. That's because these child elements right here, their margin is effectively going outside the parent. So if I say float left, the margins will no longer go outside of the parent. Once I do that, go back, hit refresh, and there we go. So we have the front, the right, the back, the left, top, and the bottom down here. So the bottom we don't really care about, but we'll keep it in there obviously because we want to make sure our 3D cube is in fact that. And then what I'm going to go ahead and do is actually start to hide out all the other faces. And how am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to do it with the viewport. So by default, I want overflow set to hidden. But if we have the CSS transformations, what I want to do is then say overflow visible. Because if we don't, when we start to animate and when we turn around the cube, the edges are going to get cut off and it's sort of not going to create a very good looking 3D cube. So let's go ahead and take a look at the viewport now. So by default, overflow is set to hidden. But however, we want to see the corners of the animation when we actually rotate around in 3D space when we have 3D support. So on that selector right there, I'm going to say overflow visible. Alright, so what I'm going to do is go back and hit refresh, and now I can only see one div element at a time. You perhaps maybe will be satisfied with the other way and perhaps maybe change the layout of the divs and so forth, but I really want it to resemble what it is in the 3D space, so just this one face at a time sort of thing. So again, it's entirely up to you. And so what I need to do now is I'm going to turn this into a link, and also we have this input right here as well, and when we click on that it targets the next face. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is get rid of all the JavaScript that sort of executes Oridomi or anything to do with the 3D cube, because this is going to cause a problem. You'll notice when I click, pow, that immediately goes, and I don't want that. So this is to do with JavaScript adding in those classes that rely on a 3D environment, and of course that's just going to screw everything up. So we don't want that, so basically I'm going to encapsulate this entire code. Now yes, we do want a date picker, however the number of months is too large because 3 date pickers in a row goes over the edges, and as you know now we have the overflow set to hidden, so we really don't want that. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is put in an if statement, and the if statement is going to check the HTML DOM element to see if it has a class. So I'm going to use the has class method, and then I'm looking for the CSS transforms preserve 3D class. If it hasn't got that class, I don't want it to execute this code. So I'm just going to open my parentheses right there, and also I need to put in an ending bracket right there. And then I'm just going to collapse this code so it makes it easier to see, like so. So if this is true, if it does have that class, then we're going to run this code, which is obviously doing all of our 3D Oridomi and other stuff. And if it doesn't, so I can say else, then run this block of code. So as it stands, I'm just going to leave it like that for now. And so what I'm going to go ahead and do is now go back and hit refresh, and when we click, you'll notice we're not getting any problems right there. So now what I want to do is take a look at the front. So this picture right here, I'm going to wrap it in an anchor, and I'm not actually going to rely on JavaScript. Don't rely on JavaScript basically if you don't have to. And right here, what I'm going to go ahead and do is just target an element, which I want to target the right element. So I just type in its ID right here. So it's a lot like a CSS selector right there, even though it's not, obviously. But that's how you would type that in CSS. That's also how I'm typing it in the href attribute here in the DOM. And so that's actually going to target that div right there. So let's go back and hit refresh. And when I click on this, you'll notice it goes to the right hand side. Perfect. And we didn't need to use JavaScript to do that. Now there is a little bit of a problem right here. Now as you know, the date object is getting hidden inside of JavaScript, and that's a very, very big problem for us because I'm not relying on JavaScript here to navigate through. So what do I actually need to do to get rid of this? But also, I don't want to break Oridomi because I still want that cool calendar effect on this date object. And of course, the way we're going to do that is using that magical class. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is scroll all the way down. And basically what I'm going to do is by default, date and date over, I want them to basically be displayed as none. So they are completely invisible. I still want to keep this down here though, but I don't need this right here in that selector because I still want to, when I add that class, make this hidden. That's very important. But however, what I want to do is, most importantly, make sure that the date element is visible when that class is on the root level element. So I'm just going to say date and say display block. And once I go ahead and do that, then I don't have to worry about it. I can just go back in, hit refresh, and there we go. And you'll also notice, because we've actually targeted this almost like an anchor, then what we can do right here is, in the URL, we can type in right, and you could type in front, and it'll take you to the front, and so forth and so on. So you can actually put the ID right there in the URL. So the next thing to do is to take a look at the back and next. So I'm just going to go back into the source code, and we're going to take a look at the right hand side. So this, I want to have the href of front, and this is going to have the href of back. Then we have this right here, which is on the back face. This is going to target the right, and if we go next on the back, we're going to go to the left, and with the left, finally, we're going to target the top. And don't forget about this link right here which says go to front. We want to set that to front. Alright, so now basically you can iterate through and have a real good play with it. So let's go ahead and cancel that. Alright, and then click on back, there we go. Click on that right there, and it's job done. Now you'll notice we're not getting a date picker, we'll sort that out in just a second. I can click next, back, just play around with it, make sure everything is working correctly. So once I've gone ahead and done that, I can click finish, and bang, there it is. So everything is working exactly how I want it to work. But we must also remember there has been quite a bit of changes here, so we also need to check to make sure that we've not done anything wrong with the CSS 3D version of this element. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is now, very quickly, I just want to get that date input working. So all we need to do is target the input. I'm not going to bother, creating, a div and applying, the date picker to that and worrying about fading it in and fading it out. jQuery UI date picker just lets you target an input field if you want, and it will automatically show and hide that date picker widget. So I might as well just do that. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is target the input right here, which is date trigger, and then what we're going to say is dot date picker. And again, you can pass in a few parameters and so forth, which I'm just going to take those parameters out of this giant block of code. So I'm just going to get that, copy it, and then we'll just collapse it again. So this makes it a lot easier, and paste that in. Alright, so now that we're actually calling this date picker method on an input field, jQuery UI will take care of the rest. So number of months, as we know, that's too many. Perhaps 2 may be too many, so we'll just have to see. So I'm just going to go ahead and save that, go back out, hit refresh, but I'm just going to change that to say right where our form is, and then what I want to do is just take a look at this now, and there we go. Okay, so we have the 2, not looking that great, to be honest with you, but we could change that. Let's just get rid of that just to say 1. Let's see if we don't get any of that extra padding. For some reason that's on there. Alright, well, we'll just leave it as 1 for now. So as you can see, we can go through, click, and it's job done. Alright, so that's basically how to get this to go to fallback support. Obviously, you could do a lot of other things as well. So now let's go ahead and check the 3D version. Make sure we haven't broken anything or if things aren't working correctly. So, as you know, all we have to do is bring back Modernizer, which will bring back that class on the HTML root level element. And let's just go ahead and hit refresh. So this is looking good. And we can click here, and there we go. What if we click here? Well, nothing happens. So that's a problem. And again, we can sort of iterate through, go to front, and so forth. So everything is working nice. Let's take a look at the date picker nervous moment, and there we go, it's still working exactly as we programmed it to. So perfect, wonderful, that's exactly what we wanted. So just make sure that this link works. So I'm just going to open this up right now. So when we say go to the right, so right here you'll be able to see we have the click event, because we can't put it on this one because this one's a focus event, that's for an input specifically. But rather with this one, because this is basically removing the class and adding the class RF, it doesn't matter whether you're on the back or whatnot. I want to go to the right hand side, which is what this is going to do. So I'm also going to put in a comma right there, just like you would with, again, CSS selectors, and we're going to target that anchor. And I forgot to give it an ID, so let's go ahead and say ID pick A, or target that element. And once we've gone ahead and done that, we can go back and hit refresh and not have to worry about, obviously, the version that doesn't have CSS 3D. Just click on that and there we go. It's just so easy. So this is looking really, really good. I mean, perhaps maybe just as an extra security precaution, because you might find that different browsers do things differently. But when you have a link right here, when you click it, it's actually, as you can see, targeting that element. But ideally, we don't really want to be doing that if we do have 3D, because the 3D transitions are going to take over and JavaScript's going to apply all those classes. So we don't really actually want to have them targeting elements like so. So what I can go ahead and do is, you could target all the anchors very, very quickly, which it sounds good to me at the moment, but you may have links in there that you actually want to go off to a web page or something like that. So you don't want to prevent the defaults for all of them, just for a few links. So we have pick A, and then we also have back and next. It's easier just to point to the classes right there. And then finally we have finish, and also go front. So if I can remember all of those, then what I'm going to go ahead and do is take a look down here. So I'm going to say number one, let's say go front, that's one of them. Then we have pick A, and then we have finish, then we have the class next, and then we have the class back. And then what I'm going to do is change the href attribute. So I'm going to say .attr, and we're going to target the href attribute, and we're just going to set that back to a dummy link. And it looks like I've got the class name wrong right there. I thought, why isn't that showing up? It's NXT. So once I go ahead and do that, let's go ahead and click save and just go ahead and hit refresh. So what I'm going to do is get rid of that hash right there. So that will tell us if it is in fact changing the href attribute. And in fact, you could inspect it. So here we have the A, and you can see the href attribute now is just a hash. So when we click on it, it's not going to bring up right, left, and so forth and so on. You're still going to get that hash right there because this is effectively a dummy link. So, very, very easy, very, very simple, and provide fallback support. So hopefully this will eliminate some doubts about introducing this into your projects now, because you can always provide fallback support. But don't forget, fallback support isn't necessarily for older browsers. It's also for the newer browsers like Internet Explorer 10 that don't support, obviously, that preserve 3D feature. So thanks for watching this lesson, and I hope you can join me in the next lesson, where we'll take a look at concluding this entire course and take a look at where CSS 3D is heading in the future. Thanks for watching.